Alright, well, it's been a while since we made videos, so I hope you're kind of rested. I hope you're doing well. I hope that you're doing, that you're keeping up with the class. I'm really trying my best to keep you guys kind of on par with everyone else, but also to, you know, not overwhelm you. So email me if you have any problems, questions, complaints, funny stories. You know the drill. Um, Today we're gonna start, and I don't know how far I'm gonna get. I'm gonna try to do at least two parts today, and maybe do the other two later in the week. But we're gonna start the Canterbury Tales. You need to know a couple things about the Canterbury Tales. On the screen is your reading guide. I'm really working hard to make your reading guides more, I guess, user friendly. I guess that's a good word to use. But also, I totally lost what I was going to say. All right, so you need to know a couple things about the Canterbury Tales. One, the Canterbury Tales is what we call a frame story, Frame, and this is not on your reading guide. You definitely want to take note of that. A frame story is essentially a story within a story. So the Canterbury Tales is, think of it this way, it's a book. The Canterbury Tales itself is a book, but the the stories, you have over 20 different stories that make up the Canterbury Tales, and that's gonna make more sense as we go through what's called the prologue. Now, if you're anything like me, when I was in school, the first thing you did when you even heard of this assignment, you read. I mean, I'm sorry. You opened your book and you went through to see how long is this reading. Well, this reading is long. Okay, it's probably the longest thing we're gonna read this year. Um, and the prologue is only the beginning of the book. So it's interesting though, because what Chaucer, Geoffrey Chaucer, the author, what he does in a poem, in a long poem, is he sets up for us, the reader, the rest of the Canterbury Tales. Just a little spoiler: we're only going to read one tale from the Canterbury Tales, but all these pilgrims that you see, all these different people you see in your reading guide, they tell a story as part of a contest, and that's what makes up the Canterbury Tales. So let's jump in. I'm on page 144, the prologue to the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. The background tells us a little bit, so let's go ahead and read that. In the prologue of the Canterbury Tales, a group gathers at the Tabard Inn in Southwark, a town just south of London, to make a pilgrimage to the shrine of St. Thomas a Becket at Canterbury. At the suggestion of the innkeeper, the hotel manager basically, the group decides to hold a storytelling competition to pass the time as they travel. The prologue that we're going to read introduces the sundry folk who will tell the stories and is followed by the tales themselves, 24 different tales in all. So, just a few sentences, but this background, excuse me, is very important. We learn a lot. Girls, I have been yawning all school year. That was a yawn. So we learned that they're at an inn and that they're going on a pilgrimage. Well, what in the heck is a pilgrimage? A pilgrimage is a journey or a trip with religious overtones. Okay, if you make a pilgrimage, you are basically going to a site or a space that is holy of some type of holiness, and you're going to pray or to give thanks or to venerate or to worship or something. So it's not a vacation, it's a religious trip. So these people, these pilgrims, we're going to call them pilgrims because it's pilgrims who go on pilgrimages. The pilgrims meet at the Tabard Inn, where they're all kind of getting together, getting to know one another before they head off to Canterbury for their pilgrimage to the tomb, the shrine of a Catholic saint, St. Thomas a Becket. If you're interested, look up St. Thomas a Becket. Very interesting guy, very interesting death. So I'm honestly not gonna read every single word, just some highlights because I want you guys to read and go ahead and look at your reading guide, answer the questions. But one thing we need to know: this trip is in now getting into the actual text. This pilgrimage takes place in spring, early spring, April, May, and they're heading down to Canterbury. They're going to seek the holy, blissful martyr, quick to give his help to them when they were sick. So they're venerating Saint Thomas a Becket. Line 19. It happened in that season that one day in Southwark, at the tabard, as I lay ready to go on pilgrimage and start for Canterbury, most devout at heart, at night there came into that hostelry some 9 and 20 in a company of sundry folks, happening then to fall in fellowship, and they were pilgrims all that towards Canterbury meant to ride. So we're looking at 29 people going on this trip, on this pilgrimage, and Chaucer, what he's going to do in the prologue, he is going to introduce us to each and every one of the pilgrims. The word sundry we've seen twice already. So let me ask you a question. Whenever you go on a road trip, and we've all been on road trips, you stop at the gas station and you get a snack. Most of the time, if it's a long road trip, you're going to get more than one snack. And you're going to get different kinds of snacks. Because, sometimes you want salty, later on you might want sweet. You're going to get a sundry of snacks. So the word sundry means an assortment or a variety. So, and just looking at your reading guide, you see that there's a bunch of different people. Now, you're also saying, well, I don't know what a friar is. I don't know what a cleric is. I know what a cook is. Things like that. But it truly is a cast of characters. It truly is a sundry of pilgrims. We learned that Chaucer is going on this pilgrimage. The very few first lines on page 146. He seems to be a devout fellow. He seems to be going on the pilgrimage for all the right reasons. And then he talks later on in this stanza that he talks to each and every pilgrim, which tells me that Chaucer, or the character that he's portraying, is a very gregarious guy. Gregarious means he's talkative. So a nice guy. So, I'm thinking we might be able to take his word on each of these pilgrims. All right. So the purpose of the prologue, line 38, 36 or so, it seems a reasonable thing. It seems a reasonable thing to say what their condition was, the full array of them, as it appeared to me, according to profession and degree, and what apparel they were riding in. So he's going to describe each and every person down to their apparel. Now you might be saying, why is this important? All these people are long dead. They went on a pilgrimage, so what? The beauty of the Canterbury Tales is this. Let's read line. Just randomly picking a line. Let's read lines 35 and 36. And what I want you to do is, as I'm reading, I want you to count the syllables. Also, I want you to notice the last word in each line. But nonetheless, while I have time and space, before my story takes a further pace, 10 syllables in each line, and a rhyme scheme, rhyming couplets, throughout the entire poem. That's pretty insane that this can be done. And look, we're going to be doing this all year. But, to tell a whole story, to tell 24 different stories rhyming and with this meter. So anyway, let's jump into it. The first person that Chaucer discusses or introduces us to is a knight. You know what a knight is. A knight, someone who battles in the service of their lord. Well, the knight, Chaucer says around line 43 or so, there was a knight, a most distinguished man, who from the day on when he first began to ride abroad had followed chivalry, truth, honor, generousness, and courtesy. He had done nobly in a sovereign's war, and ridden into battle no man more, as well in Christian as in heathen places, and ever honored for his noble graces. So we learned there that the knight is an upstanding guy. He is very chivalrous. He lives out chivalry, which is the code of behavior for knights and during this time. He's truthful, he's honorable, he's generous, he's courageous, he's courteous, and he battled very well. Chaucer tells us that no man more had ridden into battle than this knight. And during this time, and if as you read the next stanza, you see that he's very well traveled. Well, he's well traveled because during this time were the times of the Crusades. And so he was defending the faith in what Chaucer would call heathen places. Line 64 or so. In 15 mortal battles he had been and jousted for our faith, thrice in the list and always killed his man. So the knight, very honorable and a true warrior, but for the right reasons. Line 70. And though so much distinguished, he was wise, and in his bearing modest as a maid. He never yet a boorish thing had said in all his life to any, come what may. No, he was a true and perfect gentle knight. So we get a good feeling from the knight. The knight travels with fine horses, we see, and but he's not dressed gaily, meaning he's not dressed very, ostentatiously or very pretentious or obnoxious. He's a very simple guy. Okay, fine horses, but he was not gaily dressed. He wore a regular old stained tunic, and he had just gotten home from service, so he's heading to St. Thomas of Becket's shrine to give thanks. So he tells us the reason for the pilgrim's, for the knight's journey. The knight had with him on this pilgrimage his son, who was a squire. A squire is a young man who is attending on, basically serving, not in a bad way, but just attending on, taking care of a knight, and also receiving training from a knight. So the squire was a young man, it says, a lover and a cadet, a lad of fire, with locks as curly as if they had been pressed. He was some 20 years of age, I guess. So the squire, a young man, teenager, early adult, with fire in his belly. He's ready to go, and he wants to be a knight, and he's going to do a good job as that. And he was always singing. He was as fresh as the month of May, and he slept like a little nightingale. So you see that Chaucer does a good job of showing almost the innocence of the squire. And he was courteous, line 101. Courteous he was, lowly and serviceable, and carved to serve his father at the table. So he's a devoted squire to his knight, to his father, and he's just a good guy. Not all the guys we meet are gonna be good, or girls. So next there was a yeoman with him. Now a yeoman is basically a butler, I guess. He's an attendant in a noble household. And this yeoman also serviced the knight. He had peacock feathered arrows, bright and keen, and neatly sheet, hung at his belt the while. So he traveled with arrows, and I'm assuming a bow. Why do you think that might be? Also, that begs the question. I want you to visualize this. These are well before the days of airplanes, and this is a land journey. So how are they getting around? There's no plane, there's no trains, there's no cars. They're either walking, or if they're poorer, or they are on horseback. But also they're in the wild, in a sense. Okay, these are the days before paved highways, right? So think about why the yeoman might be carrying arrows. Look at the last few lines. A hunting horn well slung and burnished clean, that dangled from a baldric of bright green. He was a proper forester, I guess. Why do you think Chaucer says I guess? Remember, Chaucer here, his whole point is to teach us to tell us about these characters. So he's being very honest, okay? And so you can trust his judgment, I think. He's not out to hurt anybody. Then, line 122, Chaucer describes the nun. He said the nun is kind of dainty, basically kind of, gentle or genteel even. And the nun becomes very emotional whenever she sees an abused animal or even like a mouse in a trap. So she likes animals and she's very emotional. You know, I think Whitney Houston once sang about that. But also, he tells us that the nun is attractive in her own way. And look at line 159, and you'll see that she's found attractive in a very medieval way. Now we're going to get to the monk. The monk, just make sure you have everything here. The monk is a character. The monk loved to hunt, and Chaucer says that the monk let go by the things of yesterday. Hmm. Let's find that line. Let's start on 175. I as loud as does the chapel bell where my lord monk was prior of the cell. The good rule of Saint Benet or Saint Maur, as old and strict he tended to ignore. He let go by the things of yesterday and took the modern world's more spacious way. Now you guys know enough about a monk to know that they live very simple lives. Take a vow of poverty, of chastity, of obedience to the bishop or the abbot. Well, not this monk. This monk let go by the things of yesterday and he adopted the world's more spacious way. He did not rate that text at a plucked hen which says that hunters are not holy men, and that a monk uncloistered in a mere fish is a mere fish out of water, flapping on the pier, that is to say, a monk out of his cloister. So, also we read that he doesn't like to study, which is what monks generally do. Remember what we said about monasteries, centers of learning, centers of education. But not this monk. He'd rather be hunting. And he says, let Augustine, or Austin, have his labor to himself. Let Augustine. Augustine was a very powerhouse in the church. He was very studious, extremely brilliant, loved to study and write. And he's saying, let Augustine do that. I want to go hunting. I want to do other things. So there's that. Let's see. 193. This monk was therefore a good man to horse. Greyhounds he had, as swift as birds to course. Hunting a hare or riding at a fence was all his fun. He spared for no expense. I saw his sleeves were garnished at the hand with fine grey fur, the finest in the land. And on his hood, to fasten at his chin, he had a wrought gold cunningly fashioned pin. So, the monk also liked to dress up. So he wasn't very modest. The monk instead liked to go out hunting instead of studying, instead of writing, instead of reading, and he liked to have nice things. So think about that. Along with the monk was the friar. A friar is another kind of Catholic priest, basically like a monk. Okay, um, so you don't need to get too hung up on the difference between a monk and a friar and all that. Just know that he's a Catholic priest or brother, but this guy's a priest. I know that because he makes most of his money by hearing confessions for a fee. So, yes, he charges people to hear their confessions. And he says that he has a special paper from the Pope, a special license from the Pope that gives him, I guess, the authority to hear even better confessions or be a better confessor because, hey, it's from the Pope. But the friar, though, he seemed to be a fun guy, Chaucer says. Line 240. Line 239. And certainly his voice was gay and sturdy, for he sang well and played the hurdy-gurdy. All sing songs was a champion of the hour. So this monk, he liked to have fun. I'm sorry, this friar, he liked to have fun. He liked to sing, and he had natural gifts that Chaucer says in line 255. Natural gifts like his were hard to match. He was the finest beggar of his batch, and for his begging district paid a rent. His brethren did no poaching where he went, so the other friars were kind of afraid of him in a sense. They were not going to go on his land and take his money because he was so good at it. So that's the end of part two But like I said, we're gonna do at least two today. And I know I'm going kind of fast. I'm skipping over some things, but I want you to get into the text. I want you to, answer the questions on the reading guide. I want you to, have fun with this one. This is a fun one. So part two, the next character we meet, or the next pilgrim we meet, I'm sorry, is a merchant. Now a merchant is basically a businessman. Okay, and this merchant, yeah, not too good because he has a secret. No one knew, line 90, none knew he was in debt. He was so stately in administration, in loans and bargains and negotiation. He was an excellent fellow all the same. To tell the truth, I do not know his name. So Chaucer kind of, he likes the merchant, but the merchant has some trouble in his business. That's not good. Now, one of the more, I guess, uh, pilgrims that you're going to root for, that you're going to like, is the next one, the Oxford cleric. A cleric is basically another word for seminarian. That's the word they used at the time. And a cleric or a seminarian is someone who is studying, preparing for the priesthood, to be a priest. So I'm on line 295 or so. An Oxford cleric, still a student though, one who had taken logic long ago, was there. Excuse me. His horse was thinner than a rake, and he was not too fat, I undertake. So the horse tells us something about the cleric. The fact that his horse was skinny tells me that he doesn't have a lot of money, and he doesn't really maybe splurge on things. But but the cleric, he loves to study. He loves his books. He was too unworldly to make search for secular employment, meaning he was drawn to the church. Okay, that was what he was just gonna do. Okay, so I want you to think about how. So we just talked about three religious people, three different kinds of priest or priest to be. I want you to think about how the cleric contrasts, or how is he different from the other clergy on the pilgrimage. Okay? Go ahead and do that for me. All right. The sergeant at law. A sergeant at law during Chaucer's time. My dog is in my face. He does not like when I work at home. Hey, Ollie. Ollie. Go sit down. Go to your bed. Go to your bed a little while. All right. Sorry. Gotta give him some attention. All right. Line 319. Side note. A sergeant at law is a lawyer appointed by the monarch, the king or queen, to serve as a judge. And Chaucer describes him as a very wise man, a very smart man. Okay. Then we have a Franklin who is a wealthy. Okay, he is on my book. Then we have a Franklin who is a wealthy landowner, and he loved excess. He loved food. He loved drink. Probably women. How do I know that? Line 346. For he was Epicurus's very son. Well, Epicurean, yeah, is someone who pursues pleasure as the chief goal in life. Okay, and so he wanted pleasure. That's all he wanted. And then we meet a group of men: the haberdasher, a dyer, a carpenter, a weaver, and a carpet maker. Um, Go ahead and describe their appearance. And also, I want you to think about why Chaucer might have lumped all of them together. Then we have the cook. Everybody remembers the cook. Because the cook, even though he was good, he had a huge ulcer on his knee. But he was a good cook. The skipper is basically a boat captain. And the skipper came from far west, and he rode a farmer's horse as best he could in a woolen gown that reached his knee, a dagger on a lanyard falling free, hung from his neck, under his arm and down. The summer heat had tanned his color brown, and certainly he was an excellent fellow. Many a draught of vintage, talking about wine here. Draught of vintage meaning old wine, and wine. The legend is that the older wine gets the better, so the older wine, the better. He had a draught of vintage, red and yellow, he'd drawn at Bordeaux, while the traitor snored. What did he do? He stole the wine. The nicer rules of conscience he ignored. So the skipper, probably not the best human being out there. Then we have a doctor. The doctor, spend some time reading the doctor's introduction because the doctor is totally different than what we would expect now, okay, from a doctor. This doctor relied on astronomy, and that's how he treated his people. And so go ahead and read up on him because we want to talk about the wife of Bath. The wife of Bath is described as somewhat deaf and very well dressed. Okay, the interesting thing about the wife of Bath, though, is she's had a couple husbands before, and she's kind of on the prowl. So my question is, why is she on this pilgrimage? Is she looking for a new husband? I mean, she's got to be wealthy to have so many husbands who have died and left her everything they had. So is she just bored? And she had five husbands. So think about that. Next, we meet the parson, who is probably my favorite pilgrim in the entire Canterbury Tales. He was a holy-minded man of good renown, meaning he got a good reputation. There was and poor the parson to a town. Yet he was rich in holy thought and work. He was a learned man, a clerk, who truly knew God's gospel and would preach it devoutly to parishioners and teach it. So the parson, excuse me, the parson truly lived out his vocation, and Chaucer says, with a good priest. He understood the gospel, and he had a way of teaching the gospel to his people. We then see that, as we read on, we see that the parson truly takes care of everybody, all the souls in his parish or in his district. And I love what he says. He says, let's start with 510. If gold rust, what will iron do? For if a priest be foul, in whom we trust, no wonder that a common man should rust. So he's saying the priest is the head of the church, the local church. And if the priest falls into sin or anything like that, then what are the people going to do? So the parson truly sees his vocation and knows that he has to live up to the greatest expectations because others are looking at his example. All right, I'm kind of tired and I haven't talked this much since Friday, and it's Sunday now. Thank goodness we have tomorrow off. But you guys have this in. So we've covered parts 1 and 2. We'll go ahead and cover parts 3 and 4 another day. I'll upload it again. You need anything, email me, text me. Don't call me, I'm not going to answer, but you can email me. And if you need anything at all, know that we're here for you, and we miss you. Bye bye.